Hello, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest Great Lakes area agronomist, and welcome back for another edition of the Golden Harvest Agronomy In Action podcast. Now, today is June the 26th, and it's been a week of travel beyond the area for me. Now, with our national sales meeting in St. Louis, Missouri this week, and a wedding in Manhattan, Kansas, I've had a chance to cover a lot of miles and tour a lot of crop conditions, and I'll tell you, things aren't nearly as good today out there as it was just a month ago. Boy, way too much rain has caused uneven crops underwater, and even water in the rows was observed across many parts of Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. Yeah, worse yet was the amount of yellow corn out there, a good sign of nitrogen loss and root rots that, it's going to challenge the yield potential of this crop for the rest of the growing season. Now, on today's episode, I'm going to cover the following. One, some excitement coming out of our national sales kickoff meeting, and secondly, some lessons shared from some photos and service calls that I received this week while traveling across the countryside. So, grab your cup of coffee and let's talk agronomy. So first off, it's always exciting to, get to that time of the year when our internal folks get together and celebrate our wins over the past year and, learn about all the exciting new tools, traits, and technologies that are coming to us and to our customers, and hear about the new marketing programs to help grow our business this next year. The next step, of course, will be to share this with our seed advisors at our regional kickoff meetings and, put this excitement into action. So, I can't wait to share more details in person with our seed advisors, and our customers over the next few months. Next, let's talk about some of the calls and photos I've received over this past week and maybe what actionable things you might want to consider doing this next week. My first photo received was actually of some corn with brown burn marks all across the top of the canopy. I'm seeing way too much of this throughout the area right now, and it's obviously nitrogen burn from the side dressing that's progressing fairly quickly. The biggest concern I have when seeing this burn is not so much the damage to the corn, though this is truly not ideal when we're trying to collect as much sunlight as possible every day, but the nitrogen that is not staying in the soil to feed those corn plants throughout the remainder of the growing season is the challenge. Now, whether this loss is due to equipment leaking or due to maybe not properly keeping that nitrogen in the soil and allowing then it to volatilize up and burn the foliage, the nitrogen is obviously now lost and will either, need to be replaced, or we're going to suffer the effects of nitrogen deficiency later in the season. Meaning lower yield potential and, worse yet, the potential of stalk cannibalization and lodging. So if you're seeing this in your own fields this year, please consider taking some type of action to keep this from being one of those problems the remainder of the year. Now, I also got multiple photos this week of purple corn. Now, though this is often misidentified as phosphorus deficiency, this was simply the effect of some fast-growing plant material above ground that is photosynthesizing and creating excess plant sugars, what we call anthocyanin, and that's happening while the roots below the ground are restricted or just not growing as fast as the above ground plant material. Now, this causes these plant sugars to back up into the plant, and that overload of plant sugars in the leaves is what's causing that purple coloring of the leaves, and it just always grabs the attention of those out scouting their fields. Now, the good news is that this is just a temporary issue, and once the roots catch up with the top growth, these sugars will then translocate down to the roots, and the plants will return to that green color we expect in our growing corn crop. And next was a photo with a lot of brown spots on the lower leaves of soybean plants with the question to me of what's the problem and should I maybe apply a fungicide to fix it? Now, from the photo set, it was identified as Septoria brown spot. Though this is a relatively common disease to see in soybeans, boy, this field was especially covered in it, and boy, the plants were relatively small. Now, normally, brown spot is not a yield limiting problem, but boy, when it hits hard enough to work itself up the plant, it can then start to reduce the photosynthetic abilities of that plant and therefore potentially reduce yields. So my recommendation was, for right now, let's keep an eye on the field, but when the plants get a little bigger, probably to that V3 growth stage, or at least big enough to have enough leaf mass available to receive and absorb the applied fungicide, then to consider a fungicide application, especially if that Septoria continues to spread up that plant canopy. Now, crazy enough, I also saw what I believe to be the start of northern corn leaf blight in a field in northern Indiana this past week. Now, northern corn leaf blight typically occurs in conditions of warm, humid, and wet environments. It just destroys that photosynthetic leaf tissue and can cause yield losses up to 50% if that ear leaf is infected around tasseling time. Now, we're obviously a long ways from tasseling today, but it does help us in the understanding that, boy, fungal pathogens, they just love wet weather to get started. And, boy, once started, they can become a yield limiter at harvest. So plus, when these fungal pathogens get started this early in the season, boy, they've got just a lot more time to do their damage. So my takeaway message for today is that, I believe that we may just be setting ourselves up for a high fungal disease type of year in our weather patterns, especially if they continue to be wet. Now, whether it be northern or gray leaf spot or tar spot or even white mold in soybeans, this could be a year where timely fungicide applications make a huge difference in our harvest outcomes. And then finally, the deer damage photos, they just continue to bring to light the fact that the damage from this four-legged pest seems to be getting worse each year. So I was called out onto a fairly large soybean field in mid-Michigan where, nearly every single plant in the field had been fed back to that true leaf stage and maybe just one trifoliate or two there. Nightly feeding had just kept this field looking like it had been literally mowed off, except for maybe a few scattered plants that had yet to be trimmed off. Now, I wish I had a better solution for this issue other than, damage permits and active hunting. But those solutions do seem to be limited. Some folks are trying some sprays around the borders of the fields with some mixed results. But the damage being done, it's something where we just need to continue to try new options or, unfortunately, just stop farming those fields. So that kind of wraps up this week's podcast. I hope you enjoyed kind of what we were seeing out there. We were certainly hearing an opportunity to just give you a little insight on the national sales meeting perspective, but more importantly, spending some time here today about listening to some of the challenges and some management options of the issues that are going on in the field this past week. So I thank you again for tuning into this week's Golden Harvest Agronomy in Action podcast. Stay patient, stay safe, and I'll see you in the field.